Hi, when I was at Superbooth earlier this year in 2023, I met with Flame Instruments, who are a small modular manufacturer in Germany. And I was very excited by some of their new modules they were demonstrating. And one of them was this new Fire drum module. It's an synthesized 8-voice drum module, so it's not a sample player, with a lot of innovative features that can be sequenced over both MIDI and CV and gate. So in today's video, I'm going to show you how it works. We'll go through some of the user interface, but also we'll use it in some example patches and make some grooves and rhythms along the way. So let's get started. We'll start with a quick overview of the Fire module itself. And I have the Fire module here along with the X-Fire, which is a expander which gives you 8 gate inputs for triggering the drums, 8 velocity CV inputs for modulation, and gives you an additional 3 outputs which are mapped to voices 4, 5, and 6. Now, I really do recommend you pick up this as a package because this X-Fire expander gives you so much more capability. The Fire itself is pretty good, but this just adds so much more to it. So we'll start with a quick overview of the module, and then we'll get into how the drums work and how you do sound design on them, and we'll take a listen to them. First of all, it's an 8-voice module, so you've got 8 buttons here on the bottom to select and modify different drum types. Each of the drums can be triggered individually. You can trigger over MIDI using these 2 inputs here, or if you have the expander, the X-Fire expander, you can trigger them over CV and gate over here. You get 3 individual audio outputs and a stereo left-right out on the main module, and if you get the expander, you get an additional 3 outputs here. And you can map any of the 8 drums to the outputs, but ultimately you have 6 breakout outputs and 2 stereo outputs. So 2 your drum voices are going to end up going to the stereo outputs. You can save groups of drums as kits, so we can go in here and press load and save, and we can load individual instruments too. So if I hit load, I'm loading the clap drum sound. If I long press, I can save it. Each drum has A and B versions of it, so for each sound you have, so say we select a bass drum, you can have 2 different versions of it. And the wonderful thing about it is using the morph controls, you have a very performable set of controls to morph between those 2 A and B sounds. And you also have a master morph for the entire kit, so you can morph the kit from one to another sound. You've got CV mappings for all of the different parameters in the drum algorithms, and we also have pan and volume control as well for each of the kits. User interface is pretty simple to access. You select to select the drum that you want to edit, and then when you're editing that, these buttons are the actual parameters for that drum, except for master and setup here. Master and setup, well, setup is setup, not very many parameters in the setup screen. If you want to jump to the second page for some setup, for example, you just press the page button. This shows you the MIDI note numbers corresponding to each drum voice, which you could change depending on your sequencer. And then you could also sysx load and dump kits. You could also very handily set which kit gets auto-loaded. I've just got it set to kit number 1, so every time the module powers on, it loads up drum kit number 1. Same over here on the master. You have the master output level, which you're just using the knobs here. And yeah, that's all you have in terms of parameters. Okay, let's get this set up and actually take a listen to some sounds, because that's really the best way to understand how this module works. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually sequence this from the Flame TAKT rhythm sequencer, which is a sequence looper, which I'll cover in the next video. And I'm going to sequence it over MIDI. You could, of course, sequence it over CV and gate, but for the simplicity of this demo, we're just going to do it over MIDI. The other thing is I have set up this drum kit. If I press the volume here and I press onto page to go onto the second page, this is where I do my output assignments. And it might be a little bit hard to read here on the screen, but what I have is drum voices 1, 2, and 3, which I have as a bass drum, and 2 hi-hat voices come on outputs 1, 2, and 3. The reason I do that is I like to break them out into individual channels here on my mixer that gives me a little bit more playability when I'm actually playing them. So that's actually one trick you can do if you've got a performance style mixer, and this is the Afterlater bartender and barback mixer setup. These allow you to have a lot more playability. You can, of course, mute and unmute in here, but, doing it on the mixer is a lot more fun. Now, if I hit play here over here on the TAKT, we'll start to hear some sounds. And straight away, let's have a little quick play around with morphing. So there you see I'm able to morph hi-hat sounds. I've morphed my bass drum sound. Unmute more sounds. You hear a rim there. Very metallic sound, of course, to that. Straight away we can hear some sounds. So let's take a look at how we do sound design on this drum voice. So we're going to select the bass drum. So we'll go in here, select bass drum. Now, first of all, we've got 8 parameters on this first page for the bass drum and more on the second page. So you've got a lot of different parameters that you can actually play around with. Going back to the first page here, we've got the basic drum level. And I'm just going to mute off everything else over here on my mixer so that we don't hear it. Hit play. And now we have control over the drum level. This also corresponds to the kit level here. So if you're controlling your overall kit mix of levels, you can do it here on the volume page. Now remember, I talked about having A and B versions. You see here, there's an A and B button. So let's take a listen to kick drum A. And here's kick drum B. So you see it's a little bit more of a snappy one. And I can adjust that here using the pitch amount and the pitch decay. Now there's drum A, drum B, drum A, drum B. And of course, as I mentioned before, you're able to morph between them using the morph controls. So it's actually a really, really fun way of actually coming up with new drum sounds, editing them, and then morphing and playing them. And being halfway between 2 drum sounds is kind of a great way to find something new. You've got a drive, you've got some decay here on the oscillator. So let's take a listen to that. That's like that initial pitching up of the kick drum to get the transient. And here we can get some snappier sounds. We can overdrive it a little bit. Hold allows you to create an attack decay or attack release style setup. So here with a very high hold, you hear the drum takes a long time to decay. When we set hold to 0 though, the kick drum behaves in the way of an attack release envelope. So it's held until the gate is released and then it actually goes into the release stage. Let's look at the next page. Here's where we can set the clicks, and this is the kind of the transient click you get when the drum starts playing. So let's just hit play here. And we can tune up the click. And there's some noise samples that can be added in. There's 16 different ones. And here we have a cutoff, the filter cutoff on the drum. Like we can now filter all the high frequencies out, let all the high frequencies through. Here I'm bringing up and down the click level. Now you can hear the click because I have the filter wide open, but if I cut the filter back, you see it's a low pass filter here. But if I had it up as a high pass filter, you wouldn't hear the low end of the drum. Of course, you can have more resonance. So you get like a more snappy or crunchy sound. And bits gives you this bit reduction. And strangely, the higher up it goes, the more crunchy it gets. So that gives you an idea of the basics of how you're going to go about editing the drums. Each of the algorithms is illustrated with a lovely diagram in the manual, and all the parameters are explained here. So it doesn't take very long to kind of get your head around how all of this is set up. But really, this is a module that rewards experimentation and play. So for example, we selected drum number 2 here, I have configured as a hi-hat. Let's just take a listen to this. We'll unmute that channel there. So this is the hi-hat being played over here. Again, we have the standard controls of level, tuning, We have an attack and decay here, the hold as before. Now there you go, that started off with a hi-hat. And now it's turned into a very different sound indeed. One of the nice things about the hi-hat algorithm is it has mute groups. So this last parameter on the second page of the hi-hat configuration allows you to group them into mute groups, and individual sounds within groups will choke each other. Of course, you can always set it to no mute group. And this is where you have the classic open and closed hat playing off each other. You might want the open hat to play, and then if the closed hat kicks in, it chokes the open hat. So you're able to do that using mute groups. And of course, if you only have one hi-hat in your kit, that doesn't really matter. But if you've got multiple hi-hats, and I often like to have a couple of different ones to play off each other, you're able to group them using these mute groups. On voice 6 here, I have a rim shot. And if we just take a look at the volume output, I've got voice 6, 5, 6, going out output 4, which is over here in the expander. So let's take a listen to that channel. So over here is, we bring all these faders down so it's clear what we're listening to. So that's this voice over here. And we go back over to A and we can see the same parameters. And we can play around with the tuning. Very metallic sound. But you can have a bit of fun with this, all right. There's a lot that can be done to play it in a more melodic way. And maybe you might want to send that into a delay. Okay, say I really like this sound, but I wanted it as my B sound. And if we go over here on the B sound on the rim shot, I wanted that as the A sound. So say I wanted to copy B over into A. What I do is I just hold the B page, press A, release the A button, and now A is the sound that was in B. And I can go in and edit B into something else entirely. See there, that's how you copy sounds from one to another. There's no way to swap them right now because obviously copying one over the other erases what's there already. Now let's say we wanted to modulate a parameter in the drum sounds, but we want to modulate it using these CV inputs here on the expander. How would we go about doing that? So we'll start off with the bass drum and it sounds like this. And we want to modulate that decay parameter, say. So for that, we go to the CV menu here, we press the CV button, and it displays on the screen the same parameters that you would configure on the sound design page. But instead of talking about setting the parameters, here we are changing the amount of mapping of these velocity CV inputs. Now these can take both unipolar and bipolar inputs. If the display shows velo here, it's for velocity, which is from 0 to 5 volts. But if we just turn the data knob here, just this knob here, it now shows CV, so it'll accept -5 to +5 volts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to patch an LFO from OCT over here into CV input 1, which don't forget, now will take -5 to +5 volts. And we're going to set it to a decay attenuation there up a bit. Now we take a listen. You hear as it goes negative, and as it goes positive, it's increasing and decreasing the decay amount. We could also go and modulate, say, the cutoff as well. Now you hear we're modulating two parameters using one CV input. So we're able to get a bigger change in the sound, and we could send in stepped random voltages here from the OCT expander for a fun variation in sound. Okay, we've talked about modulating individual drum sounds, but what if we want to morph between them? So as a reminder, here's drum sound A, And there's drum sound B for the kick drum. We go back to drum sound A. Now, if I had the morph control here, I could manually morph between them. But say I wanted to put that under some sort of CV control. Well, what you can do is you can go into the morph page and press page, and now you're setting which of the user inputs, these user 1 and user 2 CV inputs, are sent to which drum voice. And in this case, we're going to send it into more 1, which corresponds to the morph control for voice 1, which is our bass drum. Now you're able to hear both morphing of the sounds and also morphing of the individual sound as we send into stepped voltages. The way I like to set up Fire, and I usually use it in conjunction with TAKT, is I'll set it as 2 groups of 4 drum voices. So kick, hi-hats, and maybe a snare or a clap. So I'll do kick, hi-hat, snare, kick, hi-hat, or kick, hi-hat, rim shot, clap, or something like that. I then play them as 2 groups of 4. So not only do I have an A and B per voice, I also now have 2 groups of 4 sub-kits, if you will, mini kits within one 8-voice kit. So that gives me 4 different versions of my kick drum, which I can of course morph between on both sides. And it's a lot of fun when you're sequencing to play those sounds off each other and to jump between hi-hats on this kit half or this kit off. And the other one I found very useful is just leave it, when you're playing live or when you want to jam on it, leave it on the morph screen and just play these and just jam around on the sounds that come out, because this is very, very hands-on and playable, and you can morph between your A and B sounds. And you could just have one kit loaded for the entire track you're playing and morphing away, playing away, and doing all sorts of scratching sounds and everything on your hi-hats. The Fire and TAKT modules work really well together, especially over MIDI, as you can see here, because this is an 8-voice drum looper sequencer, and this is an 8-voice drum module, and they work so well together. And really, you know, unless you've got a really good sequencer, you should consider taking a look at this TAKT module. But stay tuned for that in my next video, which will follow on from this one. And now we'll finish up with some sound samples from Fire and me playing around on it. As always, if you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. I love hearing from people and try and answer all your questions. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for next time.